I just wanted to take a few minutes to just refresh our memories or recap price demand, supply demand and prices, shortages and surpluses, and what causes prices to change. Most people seem to get it pretty well with the homework that I gave last week, but there's a few things that just were maybe a little bit confusing, so I want to clarify. One thing I wanted to distinguish between is what we call quantity demanded versus demand itself. So this can be confusing and it trips up people from time to time. But quantity demanded means that all the things. If you look at the schedule up here for new cars, I want to look at new cars because new cars is something that we've seen a lot of price changes with, a lot of deals lately because of people are staying home and people aren't at work, so they're trying to sell cars. So quantity demanded is shown right here in this column. So at all these different prices over on the side here, this is how much people would demand it. So at $18,000, 1,000 people would demand buying a new car. And this is for some mid-level car. At $20,000, 500 people would be willing to demand it. At 22,000 here, 300 people will be willing to demand it. And then, as we know, the law of demand goes as the price goes up, the demand quantity demanded goes down. So at 26, all the way down there, only 100 people demand this car. So that's the law of supply. We've studied that before, and that's quantity demanded. That, and you think about that, that is what that refers to, not to be confused with a shift in the demand curve. If demand goes up, quantity demanded goes up. That just means that on the supply curve, and let's draw the supply curve real quick, on this demand curve, we have demand. 1,000 people demand a new car at 18,000. At 500, we're at $20,000. Only 500 people demand it. At $22,000, only 300 people demand it. And at $24,000, only 150 people demand it, roughly there. And at 26, only 100 demand it. So we have a demand curve that slopes downward and to the right, showing that law of demand. That as prices go up, demand goes down. Highlight that. As prices go up, demand goes down. Right? We have lower quantity demanded at higher prices. I'm just going to get rid of some of my little marks there. Let's see. 26. There we go. All right. So that's quantity demanded. Now, the difference between that and demand, if we're going to talk about demand changing, a change in demand, that means this whole line will shift one way or the other. But before we do that, let's take a look at supply. Same thing goes for supply. We have supply, quantity supplied. So we got QS at all these different prices. In the law of supply, we know that it says that at higher prices, producers or suppliers, people selling cars, are going to want to sell a lot. They'll be willing to sell 1,000 cars at $26,000 for this mid-level car because they'll make more money off it. There's more of a profit. At $18,000, they don't want to sell much. Maybe that's just barely making a profit, so they only want to maybe supply 50 of them. So as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up, and we've seen that graphed on a charts before. So we have 26,000. We have 1,000 cars are supplied. At 24,000, we only have 500, so that goes down quite a bit. At 22,000, 300 people want to supply it. And at 20,000, 200 people, they'll supply 200 cars. And at 18,000, they'll only supply 50 cars. So we have a line that goes almost in the opposite curvature, right? It's an outward curve. That's supply one. So we see here that our equilibrium price, for some of this stuff here, our equilibrium price is at $22,000. 300 people demand a car at $22,000, and 300 suppliers will produce a car at $300. So their equilibrium price is at $300, showing that $22,000. And we have a quantity of 300, so they're happy at that point. So what we've seen recently, though, is that this has changed because of people not feeling super secure about what the future is, not knowing if they'll have a job or what the economy is going to look like. So we've seen something has shifted, and what shifted here is demand in recent times. So you've seen this whole line has gone over to the left. It's shifted this way. Put a D2 up here somewhere. So we have a new demand curve. So what's caused that, or what's happened as a result of that, is if we look at our original price, we have our price here. If we were to draw a line from our original price to our demand curve, our new demand curve, we would see that all this area above equilibrium price, if you remember, is a surplus. There's a surplus of cars on lots right now because people are less willing to go out and buy one, and that also could be because maybe they're afraid of going out with the virus and getting a new car who touched it. But I think a lot of that is more so that they're afraid that the economy might not do well. They don't want to make a commitment to a car for the next 5 years, paying it off, or put that much money down on a car because they want to see what happens first. So we have a surplus of cars. And because there's a surplus of cars, dealerships are saying, well, we got to get these cars off the lot. We'd rather sell these cars at less money than have them just sitting here idle and not make any money. And we want to get rid of these cars because eventually there'll be new cars out there. So what we end up having is a shift in the price, and the price goes down, right? They lower the price, they get rid of those surplus cars. So eventually we end up back at equilibrium. And I didn't plot out the new demand curve, but if we were going to say, let's say this is roughly about $20,000. The new equilibrium would be $20,000 would be a price that people are happy with, and about 200 people would buy that car. So it might be the new equilibrium price. And this is a case of the entire demand curve shifting, not quantity demanded. If quantity demand changes, all it means is we're going from this point to this point. We're moving along an existing line. There's no change in the demand curve, but we're talking about there's something that shifted, that changed people's demand overall. And if we think about those shifters of demand, right, we have those terms that we looked at in some of the other videos. Some things will be shifters of demand and shifters of supply. And in this case, it would probably be, I'd say this would be consumer tastes, right? So, or consumer, probably consumer taste, right? Because their taste has shifted. Maybe that's because of the fear of the coronavirus or because of the fear of the economy. Maybe it could be expectation of future prices, but I think probably more likely would be we classify as consumer tastes have shifted. So we end up with a new demand curve. So we can let's get rid of this old demand curve. So now we have our new equilibrium price. We can get rid of our lines here. So this is how things would go for a while. Eventually, though, we're going to see probably that supply is going to adjust in the long run. So I think about if producers aren't going to want to sell cars at $20,000 for too long, right? A new equilibrium price of $22,000. They say, well, if I'm selling this, Subaru Crosstrek or whatever it is, $22,000 isn't what I'd like to sell for. I'd like to sell for $24,000. So how do we get the price to go back up? They will cut down on supply. So they're going to stop supplying and producing as many cars. So let's say our supply line were to shift to the right. This whole thing would shift. So this is not a change in quantity supplied. It's a change in all these different numbers. Every one of these is going to change. So they might say at $18,000, we're going to supply 10 cars, and at $20,000 we'll supply 100 cars, and at $22,000 we'll supply 200 cars, and at 24 we'll say 400 cars, and at $26,000 we'll supply 800 cars, right? So the whole line is going to shift, and when that shifts, we're going to, in the immediate time, we're going to see if we go from our old price to our new price, we're going to end up eventually with a shortage when they do make that shift, when they decide to cut back on production. And we know that if there's less supply, there'll be a shortage if demand doesn't change. And when there's a shortage, that means all of a sudden people, the producers in a sense, have more of a bargaining power, and the price is going to shift. So if we erase our shortage here, we're going to see our price is going to respond eventually. So you think about the shortage, people are eventually going to say, well, now I really want to buy a car. There's not enough cars to buy. So all of a sudden they're going to start saying, well, maybe I will spend more money because there's not so many cars out there. So our new price, this will be our old price. Our new price will be up here, and price will adjust back up. And then eventually you might, this could get really crazy. We could see eventually demand's going to shift again. People, when the coronavirus finally settles down, people feel safe. Maybe they go back to work. They have more income. Maybe this whole line shifts again this way. And then we have a move back up of, we can see that price See where's price. Price was losing track of all of them. I'll erase some of these other ones. This is our old price, right? So let's imagine this is our new price up here. Price eventually will shift back up as demand shifts back up, and we end up, going back and forth. So hopefully that clarifies at least the difference between the idea of quantity demanded and demand, right? So remember, ceteris paribus. Whenever the only thing that changes is price, neither curve is going to move. You're just going to move along each existing curve. You need one of these shifters of demand that are on the previous PowerPoints, previous videos of PowerPoints, that are going to make a whole line move, and that will cause either a shortage or a surplus, and eventually, producers or consumers will respond by either being willing to pay more prices or lower prices, whatever it might be. If you have any questions, as always, please send me an email and let me know. I'd be happy to answer any of them. Hope things are going well.